Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Jim Cantrell. Jim is a pioneering American entrepreneur, mechanical engineer, and race car driver with over 35 years of experience in the space and automotive industries. In his space career, he served on the founding team of SpaceX as its first VP of Business Development and early advisor to Elon Musk, and held roles at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory and the French Space Agency. He's been involved in over 46 satellite missions, pioneered concepts like software-defined satellites and micro-launch vehicles, and co-founded companies including Vector Launch, StratSpace, and Phantom Space Corporation, where he serves as CEO and co-founder. He is the author of the book Breaking All the Rules, the inside story of the new space race, detailing the revolution in commercial space, and has written 20 technical papers. In the automotive world, Cantrell founded Vintage Exotics Competition Engineering, specializing in race car design, restoration, and competition, and actively competes as a road racer. Cantrell has received numerous professional honors, including the NASA Innovation Award, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Arizona Technology Council, along with numerous auto racing championships. His visionary leadership continues to shape the future of space exploration and high-performance engineering. Jim, welcome to the Future of Space.
My pleasure, Daniel.
Let's start with your 3 words that capture the essence of space.
There's a lot of words to choose from, but the ones I come down to is hard, audacious, and inevitable.
Have they changed over the years? Have they changed to when they were when you started and now where they are after you worked in it?
Yeah, they really have. You know, when I started in this business 35 years ago, I wanted to build the Starship Enterprise. You know, that was the dream I had. And it was maybe not inevitable, at least hard and audacious, right? But, you know, when I started, it was all a government business, and those of us who dreamt of doing it ourselves were fools. And we've seen that's changed. And so the words have changed, and the inevitability thing, I think, is really what's grown into it.
I do want to come back to that change and where we are today, but let me follow up with the second question that I always ask everyone. What do you think is the human story of space?
Well, it's really kind of 3 things. One is where we're going, you know, because exploration's in our DNA, and this is about people projecting both our physical beings and then our state of mind into the universe and exploring that and understanding what's around the next corner. We're inherently curious. The second part of it is about, you know, personal accomplishment. Take what we did with SpaceX and, you know, what Elon's done in particular. There's just great stories there about, you know, overcoming the odds, because it is hard. And that human story is what fascinates me the older I get. And then in the end, it's about our species. It's about beyond just our curiosity. It's about us literally going into the next world and the new frontier. And that new frontier is very important for the future of humanity.
Do you think that going beyond the planet is anything different than going over an ocean? It's just the scale and the challenge is different, but the fundamentals of it is exactly the same thing. Is life reaching out to new horizons?
I mean, yeah, fundamentally it's the same thing. If you're a student of history, you know, you understand that the modern world, really, the ancient part of the modern world really began about 5,000 years ago. There's probably stories that go back 20,000 years ago that we don't have much archaeology of, but it's always been about humans creating new civilizations and new places, you know, whether it was the Mesopotamians and then the Romans and on to the New World and the discovery and the projection of the Europeans into the New World. There were already people here, but for the Europeans, this was a new settlement in the New World. And in a way, space is just a continuation of that story about us settling space. But this is, as Star Trek said, the final frontier. And if you look back in this history, I would say the last 300 years, individual human freedom, individual liberty has been a rarity until the last 300 years. And I believe it was the frontiers that assured that freedom and that and the growth of the human spirit. So I think the growth of the species really depends on this. And to go beyond the planet is yet just an even greater accomplishment of the species to have that settlement on Mars, have that settlement on the moon and beyond.
As much as space is a very challenging environment for our species, do you think that we have a place to be in it?
I do. You know, when we came to the shores of the New World, I mean, here we are sitting in North America today, 500 years after the first Europeans started to settle it. I guarantee you none of them understood what would be here in 500 years, could see it. And it was a very hostile place to them, maybe not to the natives that lived here, but it was still hard life. And they adapted, they built, they adapted, they innovated. The same thing will happen in space. I don't know what that'll look like, right? Because things tend to be a lot different than you imagine them. Maybe it is the Starship Enterprise. Maybe it is boring holes in the ground on Mars, with the SpaceX boring machines and living underground. But we will figure it out, because this is who we are as a species. We move and we move forward into new frontiers.
I wrote this article about how, and this is pretty meta, but if you step back a little bit and if you look from the perspective of a planet or life where for billions of years life has been developing in complexity, it would be such a shame to remain on this tiny dot when there is such a world out there. And if the purpose of life on this planet is to connect, then it wants to connect beyond the planet. And now for the first time, there is one species who has the capacity to continue that story. And so not only this is a human story, but this is a nature story. This is the story of life itself, and where the scale and the size of the universe is the randomness, so that hopefully there's one species who is going to be able to connect the dots. So it's an important time that we're in right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, in a way, a science story, a religious story, and a story of individuals. Whether or not you're religious, there's that element for people that believe that there's a creator and that this is the mission that the creator had for this. If you don't believe in that, and I'm a man of science, but I also have a spiritual dimension, even if you're just a man of science or a woman of science, you have to look at the biology and say, what are the chances of this happening? It's almost the flip side of the same question that the religious people take on. And it would be such a shame to waste this opportunity and not continue to evolve it. And it's going to be an evolution that we won't recognize in the same way that we've recognized the last several thousand years. But if you believe, evolution, that we've come from fish that walked on the surface outside of the water and to where we are today, it's pretty miraculous, right? And so the idea of us just living in capsules on some other planets or going through the universe with physics that we don't understand today is really not that big of a leap.
Absolutely. I mean, we have to look, hindsight is always 20/20. Right? We look back and we say, oh my God, this is not a big deal. But back in those days, like even some people have trouble comparing today's space exploration to ocean or age of exploration with the ships. They're like, well, it was just the ocean. You can't compare space with the ocean. But you have to remember what the ocean represented to them. They didn't know about the longitude until years into it. There are thousands and thousands of people that died because they were literally just sailing blind into the unknown. So yes, it is comparable, right?
Yeah. We know more about Mars today and the surface of Mars and have more pictures than they 500 years ago had of the New World, So can you imagine being a European living in this comfortable little village, like anybody that's lived in Europe, which I have, know that it gets pretty comfortable. You go down and get your baguettes and your croissants on Sunday morning, and you go to your favorite cafe and everything's great, right? And then you're going to give all this up to go to this place. You have no idea how you're going to make a living, how you're going to survive. So yes, the ocean was a gigantic, I think a bigger barrier emotionally and mentally than space is today, because we know all about Mars and we've sent robots there. We see pictures. I've seen videos from these robots that make me feel like I'm there. So we don't have that for our ancestors that came here. All of us in North America are descended from some very brave people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, back in the days, nobody wanted to get on the whale ship or even, get on the ocean. They were the misfit. Imagine the captain having to navigate and, lead this band of people stuck on the horrific conditions. Like, I'm an explorer, but I would never sign up for this. And you're right. The reality has changed tremendously. And there's one piece that I'm writing in where, the human cost of exploration will never be ever what it used to be because of our capacity to gather information from a distance without having to put ourselves at risk. Back in the days, if you wanted to know what was the temperature in Antarctica during winter, you physically had to go and camp in Antarctica, risk to die in the process, and then come back and share. Now we can send a probe or something. So even by the time we get to Mars or we get to anywhere.
The other final frontier, Daniel, in exploration is the human mind. And if you go back to local to me here in Tucson, the biosphere, and those 8 individuals that went in there, that was a great human experiment. And, books been written about that on this since. I've gone, across the Pacific Ocean to Australia on a boat. And I tell you, 30 days on a boat, even though it's the modern world, when you run out of internet for those 6 or 7 days in the middle, it changes the way you will see things. It really does. And I feel sorry for people who have never experienced that because they don't have that perspective. And that is going to be the thing as humans go out into the solar system. The psychology and the stability, mental stability of the colony is going to be probably our greatest challenge, much more than the technology, I think.
That's often something that troubles me always in the vision of science fiction in the future, is the environment in where we've created spaceships and it is so austere and so cold and so almost depressing for such a species like us where we need to be surrounded by stimuli and some warmth. We create such a kind of almost like the Matrix, non-inspiring environment, right?
Yeah, the Matrix is a great example. I watch that over and over and I see more things in that. A little anecdote for you on the Matrix. When we first started SpaceX and the Matrix came out, Elon shut the whole company down and he bought the theater out and we went and watched it.
The other thing that I always find challenging and troubling about these visions of the future is that we don't give ourselves enough credit of what we can achieve together. Right? There's always kind of a doom and gloom. The humans have done awful things. And even today, and this is at the core also of what we do at Future Space, is the human species is a pretty great species. Life is messy by design, but we really are expert at figuring things out and learning from mistakes and moving forward. And I think that we've created a very negative narrative about what we do and who we are.
All you have to do is read the news in the morning and get depressed immediately. I personally have had to shield myself from it because it's this combination of propaganda, bad news, fear porn is what I call it. Certain channels want you to be afraid, very afraid. So it's interesting when the internet came about. I was an early user back when we had to use this thing called Gopher to send our emails around and things like that. And I remember looking at this going, well, the only thing people are going to be able to use it for was pornography and personal promotion. I think that's largely still true, but it's taken on this form that's amazing, like, social media and, the news 24/7. You can plug into it and unplug just like the Matrix, right? That's why that's such a great analogy. It's created a whole generation of people much younger than me, my children, who are great salespeople. Like, they know how to market because from the time they're born, they're exposed to this, picking up the phone. And so this next generation has an advantage over my generation of being able to market themselves so much better. And that's an outcome of that. But it's still, the human condition sort of looks for the bad news everywhere. And that seems to generate the most cash is the only way I can put it.
The old biology wired. I mean, whether it's food or whether it's the dangers around us, we're constantly battling the default mode that we go back to. And this is one of the things we have to give ourselves a break a little bit, is we're the first species ever that has to worry about things that we were never meant to worry, right? There's not one single creature on this planet that has to worry about what they produce. The whales go out, they'll poop whatever they have to poop. They'll travel thousands and thousands of miles, not because they love to travel or because they're part of a travel club. They do this specifically because they're at the mercy of the food source and giving birth. So we're the first one ever now who has to worry, okay, so maybe we can't create too much garbage and we have to figure all these things. And now we have all this food and we have to worry about if it's good. It's complex. It's very difficult. And we have to understand the complexity so we can have a little bit of empathy about the challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a book I read recently called Sapiens, which it talked about the history of humanity, how we went from hunter-gatherers to farmers. And that change from hunter-gatherers to farmers, he called a Faustian bargain, because we exchanged this freedom, also a dependency, right, on hunting. But this author contends that we spent, about half of our time hunting and gathering and eating, and the other half on free time. And then once we were tied down to farm animals, farms, and now wars started because we had to protect it. And we were stuck in one spot, and now obesity was possible and so forth. But this is what the species needed to grow to a much larger population, because hunting and gathering wasn't able to feed a larger population. So we're stuck in that cycle, like you say. And here we are, we're stuck in a technological cycle, which is a more modern version of that agricultural cycle.
And we romanticize nature, from very far away, thinking that everything is perfect. And
yeah.
No. Nature is not perfect. It doesn't want balance. It's, try to go back and give birth naked and see how far you get to.
Yeah, Naked and Afraid. That's a great show, actually.
Jim, I'm kind of curious, before I ask you the difference of spirit between the French and Russia and Americans, what made you go work to the French Space Agency at the beginning?
Well, at a fundamental level, the American space program was in deep trouble. It was mid-'80s. Shuttle Challenger had blown up. We couldn't figure out how to fix it, or couldn't agree on how to fix it. We knew how to fix it. And so it was a big political mess. Nothing was flying. It was nation state. I felt like our country in particular had become very incompetent at this. And so I really was planning on going to work on cars, right, in Detroit. And I got sucked into the space business, which I don't regret. But I did start to regret it when I couldn't actually build things. So the French were doing things with the Soviets, and the Soviets were a sworn enemy. I'm still an anti-communist, but they had a mission, and things were starting to thaw a little bit. So they offered me a job. I needed a job, and they needed me because I had a patent on what they wanted. So they hired me. So I went to Toulouse.
And that actually answers one of the questions that I had. You were a car person first and then became a space person.
Yeah, the only thing I've ever known for sure I wanted to do in life was race cars. And from the time I had my first car when I was 12 years old, buying them and fixing them and selling them. And go-karts before that, motorcycles. Just that's all my life was. And, machines fascinated me, still do. And I still have a lot of cars.
So what attracted you? Was that the speed or the mechanics of it?
That I could actually touch it and do something with it. And to me, when you build like a race car, it becomes part of you. There's almost this spiritual connection with the car. And, racers will tell you that's an evil car. Well, it's probably because somebody evil built it, right? It seems like their personality rubs off on the machine. So there's this almost mystical connection with the machine that I still feel to this day, right? I raced one of my Porsches this last weekend, and it reminded me of horses I've had, which, try to bite you and all that when you're saddling them up, and they bloat so you can't get the saddle on, and finally you get it all saddled up, and then they're fine, right? You get it on the track. But this car did not want to go out, right? So what's always fascinating me about cars is it's almost spiritual connection to them. And I just love machines.
It's a very Japanese mindset, and where even the tools, or we're surrounded by, everything has a certain energy into it. So swords would have a certain energy depending of who built it, who yielded it, and how many kills and everything. But all these tools or these machines would actually pick up whatever energy along the way. Some people still believe it is the case to a certain extent.
Yeah, no, Buddhism and Shintoism, those things have some reality. I mean, they go back thousands of years. And there's something, if you think about the human soul and what it represents energy, and it represents sort of a lack of chaos, despite what you might think otherwise. That doesn't just go away. It can't go away. So where does this energy go? And I'm not speaking of Christianity particularly, but this is one of these fundamental things in life that I have questions about, right? And I haven't answered. And some of these Eastern religions really, I think, touch on it.
I think that was one of the downside of going away from religion and more into atheism, and where we also left aside or left behind some of the sacredness of life and some of the mysticism of life. And I think that there needs to be kind of a balance. Some call it atheism 2.0, and where we need to recognize the sacredness into certain rituals like food. Food is more than just taking the nutrients. There's a state of mind, and this is very European way. It's not exactly what you eat, but how you eat it, and the sacredness of the sharing food. So
yeah, it's funny, as engineers and scientists, we're not supposed to think about things like this, but as I get older, this is more and more what I think about, because my life experiences have shown me that this sort of thing matters. And I first saw it, as you point out, in Europe. The French, I remember the first lunch I had at the French cafe. They all stopped and they were looking at me. And I said, what do you, and they said, you do not have ketchup on your steak. I said, no, I don't like ketchup. And you eat with a fork in one hand and a knife in the other. Other Americans use their fingers. And I said, I don't know, this is more efficient, But it was eating and what they ate and how they ate in the coffee was very important at a time in the U.S. where it's a commodity, right? And this goes on to many other things in life. And as you get older and you have, near-death experiences, you have friends who've died, and you begin to really appreciate the true beauty in just being, right? And that's why, people that say bad things about you, don't pay them mind. You just move on, right? You don't let them interrupt that energy flow, that good thing. And when you've experienced, it's real. When you have those good days where all these ideas come to you and all the good stuff happens, we've all had that creative streak, and there's something very mystical about it.
there is. I think that the maturity of a society or an individual is captured in that understanding of the world. And when it comes to food, I think one of the reasons why the relationship with food is different in America is we're a very young society. We haven't experienced much tragedy in life. But in Europe and some other, even in Asia, even the food culture over there, and in fact, in the rest of the world, except for North America, food is very much at the center of the community. Because if you've lost everything, if you have history, generational history of losing things or going through tragedy, what do you have left? If you have bread and if you have people around you, then you have hope. And so you always make sure to cultivate that independently of what happens, because at the end of the day, this is the human experience. But in the U.S., it's still, like you say, a commodity. So,
it's interesting. You mentioned Russia, but one of the things I saw in Russia, I spent a number of years there, was true of also other Eastern European cultures where, under communism, I called it communist gray, they had really suffered. And the same thing happened, to my friends that were in the biosphere. They had to have a time when they would have a feast, and the feast would have more food than anybody could possibly eat. And even in a very poor society where they can't do that, I originally took this as like a sign of respect, but I eventually, Daniel, began to understand it was exactly what you're talking about, that this takes their mind off of, the bad things that have happened, that could happen, that might happen. And it gives people this sort of in touch with the beauty of life and the importance of life and the hope. And it's so important for the psychological stability. My friends in the biosphere said that if they didn't have once a month feast, and they were unable to raise enough food in there because of a carbon depletion, and they would save up their coffee for once a month, because coffee was like a heavily resource consuming thing. So that was like these sacred beings, and then they would have the sacred, they would kill off their animals slowly. They kind of figured out how they could kill them off, and, they could have, protein. And it's so fundamental until you've been in those parts of the world and see it with your own eyes how these traditions really are basic psychological functions. It's hard to imagine it beforehand.
Talking about Russia, do you think that the China is today's Russia, or China is very different in terms of space adversary or player in the space race?
Yeah, so my opinions on Russia are not typical of, well, at least most people in Europe or North America right now. I view them quite differently, not with tremendous amount of sympathy, but I think more understanding of their historical context. And, it was a feudal society that was drug into the modern world via Stalin and some of the other dictators, and it was brutal. And they didn't quite make that transition. They're still making that transition, and in the process of their, 500, most recent 500-year history, they've been run over back and forth. The Mongols, basically decimated the society, then the communists decimated. So among the Russians, there's sort of a paranoia that's extant in the society. And the Ukraine war is really Russia reaching out, despite what you think about it, they're trying to protect their boundaries, their buffer zones. And they're going to act in their own interests that way. And if you look at them from that point of view, you begin to understand that the Chinese are a little different. And they have the same sort of sense of being a feudal society that was drug into this modern industrial society through communism, through Mao, and that all looks the same. And the outcome's quite different. It's very interesting. The Russians had this very ideological communism, whereas the Chinese ended up having a more pragmatic communism. It looks more like fascism today. I know that term gets thrown around a lot. Most people don't understand what it really means. But you align the state and the state's objectives with the corporatism. Sounds a little bit more like corporate America some days. But the Chinese play a long game, or the Russians thought they played a long game. And I think they're in fundamentally different resource kinds of possessions. Russia has far more resources than they exploit, and China doesn't. So China is at the at risk of external resources like oil, not minerals, but oil is one example that's very, very important in food. They can't raise enough food to feed their own population. So their population was out of control for many years. So what you see going on in the Persian Gulf, I have a totally different take on Venezuela and the Persian Gulf. I think this is Trump's way to create leverage over the Chinese. And, he's choked off the Venezuelan oil that went to China. Now he's choking off the oil out of Iran going to China. I think this is all setting up a triangulation. I'm not saying this is a Trump fan. I'm just saying this is the game that's going on with China. And I think it's much more serious, whereas I think the Russian communism had much more serious chance of getting ideological followers that would create revolutions within countries. China is setting itself up to be this geopolitical power, and they already are, through owning the manufacturing and the resources.
I mean, Russia was more the ideology of Russia and not the economic power of Russia. China is the economic, they have the population, they have, I think, a focus in the long term. We're talking about probably the first time ever in human history where a former superpower has a capacity to become again the superpower. Even Britain, they were all first-time superpower, but China was, and now 1,000 years later, now we're looking into them coming back. The question is, will this succeed in being sustainable in that rise for power?
Most people don't know the Ming Dynasty had a navy, in what was it, 1,000 years ago, something like that. And there's a lot of evidence that says they actually made it to North America. And they didn't colonize it, but they came to North America in all likelihood. And they sailed the seas, and then for whatever reason that we don't understand, they withdrew their navy, and it's like they withdrew into themselves. So there's a lot of mystery to China's history, and you're good and you're right in pointing out that they are a former empire that's become a world superpower today. And so, yeah, I take them very seriously in a different way than I did the Russians. I was afraid of the Russians. I was afraid of the Soviets, I should say. And I think, though, when you have countries acting out of their geopolitical interests, things are much more stable in being able to predict what they'll do. Where you have ideological interests, that's harder to predict.
You kind of alluded a little bit to it with Russia and China. And I was reading some of your biography, and I think that it is in your book. How much is timing a huge ingredient in innovation, right? If we look at the space race, all these pieces have to come together. Had Elon Musk be 20 years younger or not be the first child, or like all these players in the technology at the right time. And if we look back at all these big innovations, whether it's writing, the printer press, like how much timing is an important part of what's happening?
That's everything, Daniel. How many Einsteins have been born and stayed on the farm? How many Elon Musks stayed in countries like South Africa? On and on. Benjamin Franklin, right? These people were creatures of their time and their capability. And it's, this sense of serendipity. And in fact, my book, Breaking All the Rules, is about that serendipitous story. These things don't happen in a vacuum. They are a coincidence of time and history coming together in the right way, which I find fascinating, right? You can think all you want about, what causes the serendipity, but there is this sense of serendipity that happens that drives events. I will tell you, when I got the first phone call from Elon, I thought his name was Ian because I didn't know who he was. And that was 25 years ago, roughly. And, when I first started introducing him to people, except for a few guys like Tom Mueller and Chris Thompson, some of the others, they all thought he was a charlatan. And maybe they were right. I don't think so. But, they sort of wrote him off. And we're members of the club, but you're not getting in our club. And for 10 years, people wanted Elon to fail. They wanted SpaceX to fail. And here he is. But, he had both the resources and the time frame. He got it perfect. And, I left SpaceX early because I didn't think he'd be successful. And my view is the reason SpaceX was successful in the early days was because the shuttle retired and they won that COTS contract, which gave them $1 billion plus injection of capital to build the Falcon 9. Otherwise, they spent about $780 million, Elon told me, on the Falcon 9. And that built something that NASA couldn't do for $50 billion. So the time was right, but he had to survive those 10 years to get there. SpaceX had to do that. And, you talk to the other early guys at SpaceX, and they'll tell you, we just thought it was a job and it was interesting. We could do stuff, right? None of us, except for probably Elon, saw this coming, right? But that's true with so many other people. There was a guy named Andy Beal that tried to do what Elon did before. And Andy, banker out of Texas, in fact, built the test site that we inherited at SpaceX. We went and got it from McGregor, Texas City, who owned it. He failed. He spent $100 million of his own money. So I'm out, guys. And it's all about timing. It's all about timing. Data centers in space. I've been writing about it, patenting it for 10 years. All of a sudden, it's all the rage, right? Timing's good. I'm grateful for it, but I didn't know when it was going to happen, right? I can't create that.
Timing, and also that moment where someone sees how to combine all these different technologies, right? It's not just timing in innovation, but someone who will come and will have the capacity to breach those silos, those boundaries, and someone, like Steve Jobs, and where you can see the technology of one thing and then combine it with something else that was not necessarily connected. And then you have a new product that goes beyond. I think Elon Musk had the capacity to crisscross those different worlds and make it happen.
That's kind of a rare skill. Steve Jobs, I'm in particular awe of. I like to say he knew we needed things before we knew we needed it. And universally, every product he came up with, I hated when it first came out. And now you only use iPhones and Macs and iPads and everything else. And I watch, so here we are. Yeah.
And I think that's the humility that needs to be brought into success and, in history, is understanding how these little things don't happen in a vacuum. And often the difference between someone's misery and someone's success is just the same point back in their past. One person had a support network or someone, a helping hand, and then the other one just basically had no one, and then that was it, right? So
yeah, there's a stubbornness that factors into this too, right? It is timing, but a lot of times, if you get an idea, and I'm guilty of this, that I'm absolutely convinced is right, that it's going to happen, you have to be that stubborn soul that just keeps pecking away at it until it does happen. You know, Elon was certainly that with the first 10 years. Look what happened with Apple. You know, Steve Jobs gets fired from his own company and then comes back to save it. You know, this stubbornness is really important. I write about that. I got a new book coming out called 2 Hours Till Dawn, What Entrepreneurs Can Learn from Racing. And we have that same stubbornness in racing, right? You just don't give up. You get every opportunity, like if you're in an endurance race. I've done a lot of 24-hour races. 3 o'clock in the morning, car starts making noises and you're hurting and you're tired and your crew's tired. And you think, well, we could just all give up and go sleep, right? But you don't. There's that stubbornness inside you that just keeps you going. Entrepreneurs exhibit the same thing, and you see it over and over. So it's got to be these things together, and that's why not everybody can do it. But you know what does bother me are those who are so unhumble. Let's just use that word about their success that they think that only they're the ones that could do it. It's just really not true. You know, we're inheritors of all that came before us, of all the work people did before us, of our teams, right? Our teams are so key to this. You know, I can name names on my team. For example, SpaceX was the same way. Any of these things, it goes way beyond the guy that's in front of the camera that's taking the credit for it.
I have this rule where your outcome is depending on 3 items, 3 realities. The first one is your biology, who you are as a person. You know, are you tall? Your character, these things are inherently you, right? Then how you were brought up, these values that were given to you, or the struggle, the tensions, the challenges, and then the people that are around you when the shit hits the fan. Like, what is your environment when these moments that are so important? All these different variables are going to influence your success or the outcome.
That's really true. I think of your very last point about your team around you, and you know, when it's hit the fan with me, and I've had people who were disloyal and bad people, fundamentally bad people, their reaction is, let's take advantage of the situation. And the ones with whom we share a common vision and a common goal, and you have that, you know, it's like racing. When you have a team and your crew chief, you know, makes the car that keeps you alive, you have a trust that you just can't describe to people that haven't experienced it. And those are the guys that keep you alive. So you're 100% right on that one.
Before we move to the last questions, I want to ask you something, because you love history and you've been in the space industry for 35 years. If you make the parallel with sailing technology, ocean exploration, you know, the 1960s for space, because the incentive with Russia moon, there was obviously the shuttle, but there was no kind of real commercial incentive. 2021, there was kind of an uptake. People thought that there would be space tourism very quickly. It has been struggling. And now you have Blue Origin that kind of stepping away a little bit. SpaceX are focusing more on the commercial. Where do you think we are right now compared, like if you would make the analogy to ocean exploration?
Yeah, so I think we're at the stage where we settled Jamestown. We've sent the original crews over there, and they're struggling, and we're having to resupply them. We don't yet have self-sustaining colonies. We're still using sail ships. I mean, it's impressive, and it's almost a religious experience to go see a rocket take off, especially a big one. And I can't quite explain that, but that is still the same technology that we used in the 40s. I mean, that's the same stuff the Nazis used to bomb, the England in World War II. So we have to do all these things we talk about, we have to discover physics that we don't know today. In the same way that, for a different cause, we discovered fission and its power prior to World War II. We have to find those physics to move through time more efficiently and to make transport of people and things more efficient, just like we figured out how to fly over the oceans eventually. So that technology is coming. It would be nice if I see it in my lifetime. I'm not holding my breath. So we're making our first steps. We're going to settle Jamestown. We're going to settle Plymouth Rock. We're going to make these settlements. Maybe they're on the moon. Maybe they're on Mars. The most famous person, however, in humanity is still not born, I don't think. It's going to be the first person born on another world. And that will be, back to your original question, that is like the crowning glory of our species, is propagating that birth onto another world.
It's one of the things actually that gives me hope is imagining a world where we're going to be 10, 15, 20 billion people. And just imagining that out of that 10 billion, there's a slim percentage of people that wake up in the morning trying to find solutions. And right now we have, 8 billion. There's a little amount of people that every day wake up trying to find solutions. But if you increase that number, it's like a computer. You just have more.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
I think the world is divided into two factions. Those who try to do things and build things, and those who try to live off of it. Right? I know that's rather cynical. I've tried. I mean, I've got 6 kids. And they're all different. Go back to your point about your environment and your genetics. Well, they have the same one more or less. And they're all quite different. So there's this magic that happens when kids get these random tosses of the genetic dice and combine that with their life experience. Me, I could have been a mechanic in Yucaipa, California, rather than do the things I did if I hadn't seen that poster in the hallway. And, and that's okay for me. But, how many of those people are out there, and how do we find them? Because I think it's more than just the ones that bubble to the surface through circumstance and so on. And the answer is not our education system as we have today. It fails our students. It failed me. It fails increasingly the generations because I think it's just a degree factory that makes money for the people that are running it. But sorry, academics, I love academia, but it's broken today. So we as a society will be well served to figure this out. And you go back to communism, this is what the communists thought they could do. They thought they could identify this in the society, promote it, but there was some magic that they just totally missed, which is intrinsic motivation.
And then the challenge in all this is if you give people too much or make it too easy, it doesn't develop the resilience that one needs to have. So you have to create exposure and opportunities without making it too easy for them and just accepting that they need that hardship of life, to figure it out. So it's complicated.
It is. Nobody said this was easy.
Absolutely. Jim, what would be your 3 words of wisdom?
3 words of wisdom. I would say work hard, first of all. When my kids have troubles, I say the only thing that's going to be your salvation is hard work. Sometimes it's physical labor, but just work hard, right? If all else fails, work hard, right? The second thing is find your inspiration, find your passion, whatever it is, but be inspired, right? Take that time, whatever it is, whether it's eating, whether it's looking out at the hills, looking at the stars, be inspired, right? Find that thing that feeds that inner part of you, because we are spiritual beings in our core, as well as physical beings on our outer layer. And then lastly, do good things. And there's so many people I run into, and I'm not naming names, but they focused on money, they're focused on power, they're focused on all the wrong things. And I'm not saying let's all be ideologically pure and do-gooders, but think about what moves the needle for your family, your community, your nation, your species, right? In that order. And go do it. Amazing words to live by. Just one more thing. What do you hope to see in space? What do you think actually, not a hope to see, what do you think is actually going to happen in the next 30, 40 years in terms of big accomplishments? So I think there's 3 tracks in space. I think there's the economy, sort of the economy like we all live it, that makes money for the average person, that leverages space. And I think that's digital access. That's what we're trying to do at Phantom. We think that ultimately to crowdsource the billions of minds, going back to your thing about how do we do that, we're thinking of the Space App Store, just like the Apple App Store. How can I give that access to these people, and how can they develop a space economy around it? And then the second thing I think is going to happen, this is what SpaceX is focused on, is planetary settlement. You look at everything he's always done, Elon and SpaceX has done, it's about settling the planets. And Starlink pays for it. The data centers, I think, will help power it. So that'll be the second one. And then the third one will be this business that Jeff Bezos talks about, which is you turn Earth into the residential zone and you turn space into the industrial zone. And because Earth is a very fragile place, it's a beautiful place. It's my favorite planet in the solar system, and we've got to take care of it. So, gradually moving those things off as we solve the transportation problem becomes more and more attractive.
I actually wrote about that, where one of the reasons why we have now a home in the backyard that is just purely for enjoyment is because of our capacity now to import everything that we need and to export everything that we do. You don't need a garden anymore. You don't need to have a power. Like, everything comes from somewhere else, so you can kind of take care of that little home and just beautify it. And ultimately, you want to do the same thing with the planet. You want to be able to harvest, from somewhere where the impact is not as damaging as it is here. Because here on the planet, the problem is not what we have, it's the extraction of it.
Yeah, that's in the future. That's for young people listening, go solve it.
Excellent. Jim, who are you rooting for, F1?
I was a Schumacher guy, and after he passed away, or at least left F1, not so much anymore.
Not so much anymore. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Jim, for your time. I really love the conversation, and I look forward, hopefully, to see you maybe on the track. We'll go and race.
Come to Arizona. We'll go out on the track together.
Excellent. I'll take you up on your word. Thank you, Jim.